Roper with Caring.com. Welcome to the latest in our Digital Marketing Academy series of webinars. Today we'll be talking about best practices for handling internet leads. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. The first is that we will be sending out the deck as well as notes from today's session. So you don't need to worry about writing everything down. We'll be sending this to you. Usually we get it out on Monday following our session. Also, we encourage you to participate, asking questions or providing comments. My colleague Megan Fletcher is here with me at Caring.com, and at the end of the webinar we will be taking your questions. So feel free to use the question box. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen, and just type any questions that you have into that little box, and we'll get them here and answer them as we get them. This is me, Katie Roper. A number of you know me. I've been with Caring.com a long time now. I joined in October 2008. Prior to that, I was in high-tech sales, and I've sold a lot of things in my career, but I still have not been able to get either my mom or my mother-in-law to consider non-family care. So if you have any tips, I'm always open to them. Today's agenda, here's what we're going to be talking about. You do need to sit through a little commercial. I apologize, but that's the price of a free webinar. Then we're going to talk about internet search, why it's important and how it works. And then internet leads and what are important when you're dealing with an internet lead. And then, of course, we'll talk about some tips for handling internet leads in general, but particularly when you have high volumes of them, which, as we all know, is coming up with the holidays. So Caring.com is the #1 online senior care resource for people caring for an elderly loved one. We have the most consumer reviews of senior care communities and also agencies. We get 3 million visitors every month coming to our site, and honestly, many of them don't even end up engaging with our directory and searching for senior care. They come to read our thousands of original articles. They come to support other caregivers in our support groups. They come to check out the local listings for everything from assisted living to skilled nursing to geriatric care managers. And when they're ready, they engage with our family advisor team, and we refer them on to the appropriate care provider, whether that's a community or an in-home care agency. We're also part of Bankrate, which has a network of websites offering lots of different things, getting 14 million monthly visitors. So what is internet search and why is it important? I saw something from Varsity Branding, which did a survey for Asbury communities, and they surveyed people searching for senior care, and they found that 0 boomers started their search in the yellow pages, which I thought was a really telling statistic. I was also yesterday on site with one of our clients, and she told me that she thinks in a year she gets maybe 1 call from the yellow pages. So the yellow pages is not really part of people's search world anymore. Now it's Google. So those internet leads, which people say, well, you know, they're only internet leads, they don't convert. I hate to tell you this, but those internet leads are the people who used to pick up the yellow pages and call. It's not surprising because today's consumer searches for everything online, everything from a hotel for TripAdvisor to shoes to breakfast cereal, and everything's got reviews. You can even get reviews of Honey Nut Cheerios. So the question is, why would senior care be any different? And of course the answer is that it isn't different. People are searching for senior care online. The Then there's a question of who are these internet leads? So let's talk about them. Here's an internet lead. She's probably an adult daughter. She's probably in her 50s. She's often still working. In our survey, more people than not were actually still working and trying to juggle care. She has likely been prompted by a medical situation. In our research, we found that about 60% of people who moved into a senior community did so because of a medical diagnosis, and that was actually consistent with the results of the varsity branding survey that I mentioned earlier. So it seems to be pretty general across just about all communities that it's a change in a medical situation that prompts a move in. Mostly, she doesn't know about her local options. When we survey people, only about 40% of people who had searched for care in the last year said that they knew the communities in their area. Either she's moving her mom to her community from the place where the mom lived, and so she just doesn't have any experience with them, or very often she doesn't live in the same community as her elderly loved one, and consequently doesn't know about the senior community that's right down the street. She uses her smartphone, and on her smartphone she is researching even those communities that she knows. She goes online, she reads reviews, and she checks out what she finds about communities known and unknown. If you have any doubts as to whether these are true, go to our blog. We've done a couple of posts recently about the findings from our survey into the caregiver journey. Reviews. Reviews, I can't stress enough how important reviews are. We've talked about this before. We're doing a whole webinar in January on social media and reviews. And there's all kinds of research from other parties about reviews online in lots of different industries, but we see it too on caring.com. We see that listings with reviews can get up to 14 times more inquiries than listings with no reviews. And we find that listings with reviews can get up to 8 times more move-ins. Here's some data from a case study we recently did for a partner of ours. And what we saw was that listings with 15 or more reviews were getting 8 times the move-ins versus those with 1 or 2 reviews. So it was quite dramatic and evident across all the different data that we've looked at here at caring.com. Now let's talk a little bit, when you're dealing with an internet lead, what are some of the important factors to consider? And the most important one is what we call speed to lead. This is a data point from a company called Velocify, which does software and infrastructure for handling leads. And this is looking across all different industries and all different sorts of inquiries. But what they found was that if you can get to that lead within 1 minute, there's almost a 400% greater likelihood that that lead is going to do the thing you want it to. Look at the next data point. Within 2 minutes, it's cut in half the likelihood that you would ever engage with that person and get them to come in and take a tour of your community. By the time an hour goes by, it's a tenth. You're only a tenth as likely to ever talk to that person. We see this at caring.com in our own call center. The importance of speed is dramatic. The other thing that people often underestimate is the impact of personalization. So this is not just sending a generic email or leaving a generic voicemail, but actually tailoring your message to the situation that the person is in. 2 data points here about general internet marketing. Experian says that there's a 6 times increase in conversion with a personalized email message. And socialfish.org says 3 in 5 consumers feel better about a brand when their communication from that company is personalized. So that's outside of our industry. What about within our industry? Here's a case study. Again, this is a Caring.com partner, and we set up a mystery shop for their communities. And we sent out a lead that went in and was handled as the lead would ordinarily be handled. And then we evaluated the responses that we got to that. And what we found was that communities who used a custom follow-up had a 44% higher conversion rate than those that didn't. So this is any sort of personalization, either an email or a phone call, and we looked at their historical conversion rate on the Caring.com leads. The other thing we found is that communities using a custom follow-up within 60 minutes have a 21% higher conversion rate than those using a custom follow-up within 24 hours. So anytime you can get to a custom follow-up is better to be custom than not, but you'll boost your conversion rate even higher by doing so quickly. And this gets back to that speed to lead thing that we were talking about in the last slide. The other thing that we found from this particular mystery shop is that communities with 3 custom touches in 72 hours had almost a 50% better conversion rate than the communities that didn't. So that was the best practice that we saw. It was the protocol that the partner company requires from their salespeople. So the people who actually did what their bosses wanted them to saw the results in their conversion rates. If you are a Caring.com partner and would like us to do a mystery shop of your salespeople, you should talk to your client services person, and we can set that up for you. Here's another data point from Philosophy, and this is how many times should you call. And there's no fixed answer to that. Each time that you try, looking here, you can see the connection percentage rising as you make more and more calls. Even up to 9 call attempts, you're getting to more and more and more leads. But of course, there's a cost, both in terms of the call time, in terms of your salesperson's time, and in terms of the perception that you're creating with the consumer. So at some point, you hit really diminishing marginal returns. And what Velocify has found is that 93% of leads that you'll ever reach are reached within the 6th call attempt. What we find at Caring.com is that it's really important for us to make 4 calls, but after that, we kind of deprioritize things. So as you're thinking about whether to call and how many times to call, this is what we do at Caring.com. We have determined that different calls have different values. So a first call to a new inquiry is the most valuable thing we can do, which means if we get somebody submitting a lead form, we jump on that immediately, and we prioritize that over anything else that our call center can do. The second call attempt on a new inquiry is almost as valuable. And we typically do our first inquiry within about 30 seconds and our second call attempt within about 10 minutes. But then the next most valuable thing that our people can do with their time is to call back on a tour scheduled and encourage the person to go on the tour and answer any questions and remind them. And that's because, of course, a tour is so important in the sales process that anything we can do to get the family to the community is hugely, hugely valuable. Then there is the callbacks to families that have not scheduled a tour but have been determined to have a high need, and you can see the other priority. So, in terms of how many times do we call people, it really depends on how many of all these other things we've got going on. We will call sometimes 7, 8, 9, 10 times, but that depends. I would strongly suggest that you do some thinking and exploring about how much each call is worth to your organization. You may find that these are different for you than they are for us, but it's a really smart way to help your people prioritize. So in terms of prioritizing your leads, let's take the things that we've talked about and map them into reality. You should do whatever you can to make that first contact with an inquiry within the hour. And an hour is really sort of the outside time. If you recall that velocified chart that we talked about, you really want to do it within minutes if at all possible. This doesn't have to be a long contact. If you get a voicemail, you know, you can leave just a one-sentence voicemail if you don't connect. And then the other thing that you should definitely do as soon as you can is send a personalized email. This isn't emailing a brochure. It's an actual email referencing the person's situation, introducing yourself, and encouraging them to reach out. So speed to lead, can't say enough about how important that is. The second thing that you really want to do is you want to touch everyone once, and then in the course of making that first contact, you want to prioritize them for the second contact. So, for example, if you're getting referrals from Caring.com and there's a tour scheduled, that should probably go to the top of your list. Once you've made those first calls to everybody who you're working that day, if you still have time and want to make a second call, do it to the people who've scheduled the tour. Another tip is to read the notes that the caring advisors or anyone else who's sending you leads has put there. If you're getting leads from your own website, most lead forms have a space where the family can type in what their concerns are. And read those and use that to prioritize. You can look at the geography. If they're seeking care in your city, that's maybe not quite as valuable a lead as somebody seeking care in your zip code. Sometimes you can tell from the person's phone number how close or far they are from your community. Sometimes you can tell because they've entered a search term. So if you're getting leads from your own website and you match people up to 35 miles away, you want to probably prioritize the people 1 mile away higher than the people 30 miles away. Another thing to look at in the notes is the care level. Are they in need of care that you can provide or not? Of course, financial, that's an easy one, but this is an interesting point. Are you talking to the adult child or are you talking to the prospective resident? Interestingly, Caring.com data and everybody else's data that I've seen have found that if an adult child is involved, that person is much closer to moving into a community than if they're inquiring for themselves. So again, if you've got more leads than you can handle, you want to prioritize the influencer, the adult child leads, over the prospective resident leads. You've got a little more time to get to those prospective residents because statistically speaking, they're less likely to move in. So after you've touched everyone once, use these parameters to schedule your follow-up based on how important those leads are to you and how likely they are to be moving quickly. Another thing that I would recommend is borrowing resources if you need to. This is a way to get through the busiest time of year. Maybe you can have a receptionist who sends the follow-up emails, or maybe there's someone else on your team who can help you follow up with contacts. Before I go into some specific things you can do to handle your leads, I'm going to try again taking a poll. Those of you who've been on our webinars in the past know that this can be a little sketchy, but okay, here's a poll that's open, and I'm going to ask you please to choose which one of these is appropriate for you. Okay, we're getting lots of votes. Thank you. If you are a community or a care agency and you want to answer the question, that would be terrific. It'll be interesting to see what people's needs are related to leads. It looks like we've got 68% of people voting, 70%, a couple more out there. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and I will share the results with you. Here you can see most of the people on the call would take more leads if they knew where to get them. Only a few of you have too many leads. Interesting. Okay. And I wonder how this changes in January. I should have asked another poll question. Okay. Thank you for that. What I'd like to do now is show you a couple of examples. I'm going to start with some community leads that have come through caring.com and talk about how to prioritize them, and then we'll go to some home care leads that have come through. So here's an example of Larry, who wants to hear from the Hawthornian. And I've highlighted a couple of things. One is advanced Alzheimer's disease. Somebody who's suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease is probably more urgent in terms of their care needs than someone who is not. So if you see advanced Alzheimer's disease, you know that this is probably a high priority lead for you and is worth 2 or maybe 3 calls to get in touch with someone. Here you can see Larry says it's becoming too much for him. She's going to need assistance with bathing and dressing. Take a look at the budget. Please send Larry the following information: brochure, pricing, and immediate availability. Again, this to me feels like a pretty high priority lead. One thing I wanted to bring up, on our recent webinar where we were talking about our sales process, we got a bunch of questions about, well, you've told Larry that we're going to send him a brochure, but my sales process doesn't allow me to send a brochure until I've talked to him. And you know, that's absolutely fine. There's no reason that you can't not send a brochure. But please do send Larry something. This is a high priority lead. And when you send him something, what you might want to think about doing is referencing his conversation with Carol at caring.com. So you might leave a voicemail for Larry and say, hello, Larry, this is Katie Roper. I'm calling from the Hawthornian. You spoke recently with Carol at caring.com, and she asked me to give you a call. I'd love to talk with you about your wife and give you some more information about our community. My phone number is, and then leave your phone number. You don't want to sell in a voicemail message, and you don't want to even sell in an email message. What you're trying to do when you're wanting to reach out to people is connect with them. So again, if it were me, I would rate this lead high priority, and I would queue it in my CRM to get a couple of calls and emails. Here's another lead. This is for Carol, wanting to hear from Montclair Estates. So Carol is age 67. She's looking for independent living, and she's looking for herself. So right out of the chute, you know that this lead is less likely to be in urgent need of care and urgently looking to move than the other ones. So if you are one of the 6% of people who have too many leads, or if it's January and you're flooded with leads and you don't know which one to work on first, don't work on this one. Another issue here is she's looking for independent living, so she's probably open to a wider geographic area than somebody looking for an assisted community who wants it to be right near. She's looking within 25 miles of Evergreen, Texas. If Montclair Estates is actually in Evergreen, this is a much hotter lead. If you're 20 miles away from Evergreen, while Carol has said she would consider it, it's less likely that she's going to go that far away from where she is now. So again, you can use information like this both to personalize your outreach and also to determine how high a priority this is. If you want to, you should definitely send her one email, give her one call, but you might want to deprioritize that second call until you're not so busy. Here's a home care example. Betty wants to hear from Homestead Senior Care. Her husband, Larry, has Parkinson's disease. His condition is declining. Betty is expecting your call to discuss services and costs. This, again, is probably a pretty hot lead. She's talked to one of our agents. She's expecting a call. This is one I would prioritize ahead of maybe some of the other ones. Here's another one. Janice wants to hear from Visiting Angels. Her husband is going into the hospital for knee surgery, and she'll need help when he comes home. So she doesn't, this email doesn't say exactly when his surgery is, but the need is not immediate perhaps, but it's coming up soon, and this should be pretty solid. He is scheduled for surgery, so you know she's going to need some help. Again, important to reach out very quickly because that's what you need to do. But then if you need to wait a few days before giving her a second call, this feels to me like one you could do that with. So a few tips on getting through January or any other time when you're very busy with leads. One thing to ask yourself or ask your salespeople is, what can you not do in order to get to those leads quickly? So maybe there are some administrative things that you can postpone for a couple of days or maybe even a couple of weeks. Another question is, who else might be able to help? Maybe you've got somebody else working in the community who would be willing to make a few sales calls. Maybe you could ask somebody else to send some of the follow-up emails. Another tip, can you find some extra time during the day? Maybe you bring your lunch in and instead of going out to get it, and use those extra 10 or 15 minutes to crank through some calls to these leads. And you know what I do when I'm really busy is I use technology. I prioritize my own leads within the CRM. I have an email. Now, again, it's really important to personalize your emails, so you don't want to just cut and paste, but you can have a general outline that you typically use, and then just make sure that you're remembering to update people's names in the email and put in a few personalized details before you send it. Another thing, of course, is your cell phone. You can, if you don't already, you can set it up to get your email on your cell phone, or even to access your CRM through your cell phone, so that if you're not exactly at your computer, you can still jump on those leads when they come in. Not so much for January, but as you think about those internet leads, remember that it can take a while for people to make a senior housing decision. This, again, is a snippet of data from the research that we did earlier. You can see that while about 31% of people make their housing decision less than 30 days from the time they inquire online, there's a lot of people who take a whole lot longer, and we're even seeing people who are more than 3 years out who still eventually make the decision to move in. So Don't ignore the ongoing nurturing of your leads, or work with somebody like Caring.com who will nurture your leads for you. This is important in managing internet leads, but again, if you're concerned about a flood of inbound inquiries in January, I would not start this until, maybe March or April. A couple of points if you're going to do lead nurturing. Provide real value. Nobody wants to just get another email saying, hey, are you still looking for care? Caring.com has all sorts of content on our site, and we send people links to articles that they might find helpful. You can do the same thing. Be consistent in your lead nurturing, so don't just send one random email periodically, but have a real plan for how you're going to do this. But do make sure that if people want to get off your list, you have a good way to take them off. And finally, make sure that your lead nurturing includes calls to action and ask them for their business. That closes the formal part of the conversation. What I'd like to do now is open it up for discussion and questions. If you have questions about anything we've talked about, this is a great time to ask. And the other thing I'll say is if you have tips that you'd like to share for how to handle a situation when you get flooded with leads, please let us know. I'm going to put you on speakerphone, and my colleague Megan Fletcher is going to help moderate some of the questions. Okay, Megan.
Thank you, Katie. A question that's come in is, which sales tracking software or CRM do you recommend for senior living?
Oh boy, that's a bigger than a breadbox question. There are lots of terrific options out there. One that I've been very impressed with is Sherpa, the new product that has been getting a lot of press recently. But they're not just a CRM, they're a whole lead handling philosophy. So that would be a big decision both in terms of technology and in terms of, you kind of need to change your whole sales philosophy to really make the best use of Sherpa. There are lots of other options out there, and what I'll do, I'll follow up with you maybe offline and try and get a little bit more of a sense, if you have multiple buildings, if you want to do other things besides the sales piece, there are lots of different parameters that go into that conversation. Just do make sure that whatever system you're using allows partners like Caring.com to feed leads into it automatically. That's a great time saver. And interestingly, on the home care side, the leading CRM system, ClearCare, which does a great job on many dimensions, does not let us put the leads directly into the system, and it's a real pain in the you-know-what for our home care partners.
You made a comment about miles away was interesting. Is it linear, such as 10 miles away is half as likely to be interested in the community as a prospective resident 5 miles away?
I haven't actually looked at it on that level of granularity. It's not a perfect system. So, for example, we have situations where the cost is definitely a factor, and the communities that are closest into the exact place that the family wants to be may be things that they can't afford. So they're willing to go 10 miles out in order to find a community that is either exactly the right fit for them or is appropriate for their budget, or whatever other concerns they would have. Another thing that we find is that sometimes people are interested in a community that's near their office rather than their home to make it easier to drop by and visit their loved one during the day. So it really depends. It's not a hard and fast answer, but in general, the data that I've seen from industry partners is that about 75% of move-ins come from a 5-mile radius. So again, we're talking about how to deal with more leads than you can comfortably handle. If you have to decide which one merits a third and fourth callback, call back the ones in your zip code first.
Do you recommend emailing pricing to an internet lead upon the initial inquiry?
I do, yes, because it's very frustrating to have no idea what the price of something is and have the salesperson not tell it to you. But having said that, senior housing pricing can be complicated, and it's definitely not worth it to get too complicated in an email. So if somebody wants you to email pricing, what I would do is send them an email saying, you know, hi Larry, thank you so much for your inquiry. I'd love to assist you as you look at options for your wife. In general, our apartments are between $3,000 and $6,000 per month, depending on what you want and the care levels that you need. I'd love to show you the difference between our more expensive and less expensive apartments, and you can see for yourself why we're charging a little more for one rather than the other. Would there be a convenient time for you to come into my community, maybe next Thursday at 2 o'clock? So use that price, give them an idea of what the price is, and then offer the tour as a way to help them really dive into exactly what the cost of the community would be.
Can Caring provide text messages when a lead is emailed?
Yes, we can. That's something you should work with your client services person to set up. And it's a real smart way to do it, too.
Sometimes we get leads late at night. What is your opinion on contacting them?
Well, there's my opinion and there's the law. By law, you're not allowed to call people, I think, after like 8 or 9 at night. And it's also really just not best practice. I mean, unless you're like an EMT, you really don't want to get a call in the middle of the night. If you happen, though, to get that and it's coming in as an online inquiry at 11 o'clock, that's a great time to send an email. I mean, imagine if you are a stressed out, still working full-time family caregiver and you're up at night because you can't sleep brooding over what to do about your loved one, and you fill out a form and hit submit, and all of a sudden back comes a personalized email message saying, you know, I'd love to help you. Would you like to come in and meet with me tomorrow morning? That I'm going to have a terrifically favorable impression in that community. So I would say if you're up anyway and you get that inquiry, that's a perfect time to email someone.
After 3 attempts, whether by email or phone, if we do not hear from the lead, we are told to close the lead out in our tracking system. Is that too soon?
Well, again, it's a matter of priority. So if you've got somebody like some of those leads that we saw where the loved one has Alzheimer's and they just can't cope, and you know they're in your community and they're in your price range and they're desperate, personally, I keep trying. That seems like a really good lead, and it could be very likely that the reason they're not calling you back is not that they're not interested, but because they've got their hands full with a person who's a wandering risk and is unable to do anything for themselves. So I would definitely keep trying. The other thing is, even if you close the leads out, you might want to think about an organized nurture campaign where you reach out to them via email every couple of weeks and say, hey, you know, how's it going? Nobody submits an internet inquiry for anything just for grins. Everybody knows what's going to happen. And nobody looks for senior care just for a joke or a laugh, or, you know, in that data that I showed earlier about the length of time that a sales cycle takes, only about 30% of people move in within the first 30 days. The rest take, you know, 2 months or 3 months or a year or 2 years or even 3 years. So it's a long answer. I don't think there's any one particular answer to your question, but if it were me, I'd find a way to keep trying, although probably not calling them 10 times.
How many communities are family advisors sending each lead to?
If you want to read up on our Q&A webinar with our family advisor team, it's on our blog. The URL for the blog is partners.caring.com. We had a whole discussion of this then. In general, the family advisors send to as many communities as the family wants them to send to. So we'll have people who are, super thorough and diligent, and they want to talk to every community that's appropriate for them in the area. We have other people who are in a rush, and they want to look at the 2 or 3 best ones and not the others. If people ask us for our opinion, what we generally do is refer to the 2 or 3 best fit communities that we can find, and then call them back later and say, how did those work out? And if they were great, then fine, and if they weren't the right fit, then we can work with the family to understand what they didn't like about it and maybe refer them to some other ones. All right. Thank you all for your time. That is the end of questions, and before we leave, I just wanted to put in a plug for our next webinar. We talked about it a little more. It's Beyond the Like, Strategic Social Media Marketing for Senior Care Professionals. We'll talk about reviews, we'll talk about Facebook, we'll talk about Twitter, we'll talk about all the other things you can do for social. It should be a great webinar, and if you've attended some of our social media webinars in the past, one piece of feedback that we got was that it was a little basic. So this is actually building on some of the things that we've talked about earlier, and I encourage you all to attend. And finally, if you would take more leads, if you knew where to get them, we've got leads for you, and we'd love to work with you and partner with your sales teams to get families into your community. So for more information on receiving internet referrals for your business, here's our contact information. I encourage you to reach out. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you on another webinar soon.